This interview has been conducted for St John Scotland, 75 Years of Making a Difference. My name is Dr. Sue Morrison and the respondent is Mario Di Maio. This is the 4th of November 2021 and the interview is taking place in the mountain rescue base in, what is this area called?
Elric.
Elric, thank you. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed for the project. For the record, would you please confirm your name?
Yeah, my name is Mario Di Maio.
Thank you. And what is your age or just your year of birth?
I am 68.
Thank you. Where were you brought up, Mario?
I was brought up in a small village called Peter Cooter, which is only about 4 miles from here actually. And I was born in my parents' house in 1953.
Have you ever kind of moved away from this area?
I left school at age 15 and briefly was in the Navy, and as a result of an accident I came out of the Navy and came back to Aberdeen, lived at home briefly thereafter, went to work for a short period of time with an insurance company, then decided I was going to go to university, went to university and studied geography and geology.
Excellent. Could I just ask you about your birth family?
Yeah. So my parents is an interesting mixture of Italian and Scottish. My father is Sicilian from Palermo and my mother from Echt, which is a small village in Aberdeenshire. And they met when my father, who came to Scotland as an Italian POW in 1944, was sent out to work in my maternal grandparents' farm, where he met my mother, and after the war he came back to Scotland and married my mother and lived in Scotland for the rest of his life.
When you were growing up, how many siblings did you have and where were you in the line?
I've got 5 sisters and a brother, and I am the youngest in the family, and there's quite an age difference between us. But we lived somewhat crowdedly in a house in Peter Cooter, and gradually I ended up being the last one to leave the house at the age of 15 and a half when I briefly went into the Navy.
Excellent, thank you very much for that background information, that's fascinating. Could you tell me when you first heard of St John Scotland?
I joined the rescue team in June 1970, and the then team leader, Bill Marshall, who really was the founding member of the Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team, and he did that through an organisation which was the Aberdeen Venture Club, which was an organisation really designed to give predominantly young lads, but also some lassies as well, opportunities to get into outdoor type activities, and at that point there were very few really formal mountain rescue teams around. This was the early 60s into the mid 60s, and Bill decided in 1964 that there was a sufficiently effective group of young folk in this organisation that he could mould them into a mountain rescue team, and in 1964 a formal mountain rescue team was formed. But as I'm sure you can imagine, back then it was very basic. They didn't have any real mountain rescue equipment. Indeed, they didn't really have very much in the way of hill equipment. And Bill spent a lot of time, effort and energy in gathering together from various local sort of people that he had contacts with, either bits and pieces of equipment or gathering some money to get equipment and so on. And at that point, he made an approach to the Order of St John because we were looking basically for somewhere that we could use as a base. And that wasn't all that easy to find at that time around Aberdeen. And through a connection in the Order at that point, he got access to a garage at the bottom of what was the St John's Hospital in Aberdeen in Albine Place. So Albine Lane runs parallel to Albine Place, and there was a small, basically a one vehicle garage there, but it had a sort of upper floor, and so we stored a vehicle there, and the upper floor became the meeting room for the for the team. It was very basic, and my memories of it in 1970 when I joined the team was that in winter it was really very cold. There was no heating in it apart from a 1-bar electric fire. So when we had our team meetings, I mean, everybody sat with all their clothes on and big jackets on and all the rest of it because it was so bitterly cold. But it was a start, and Bill, from that we got access to a second building that was part of the hospital and owned by the Order of St John at that point, and a second vehicle, and so we had 2 vehicles there and a meeting room there, and that really was the team's base for a lot of years, right through until the mid-1990s, in fact, was where we worked out of, and very effectively too. So that was my first contact with the Order, basically because Bill had managed to get a contact within the Order who was able to provide us with accommodation at that time. And subsequent to that, the involvement of the Order with Mountain Rescue, I think, became initially very much focused on Aberdeen, and the Order helped to provide some financing for a vehicle. And so that connection with the Order really just sort of grew and developed out of that. And as the years went on, I think the Order obviously decided that, you know, Mountain Rescue was a very worthy cause in terms of their objectives. And Bill, and then subsequently myself, when I took over as team leader in 1993, were involved in supporting the Order, going out to other rescue teams and basically trying to persuade rescue teams, I think that's the right word, that having a connection with the Order was really a very beneficial thing for them, because out of that the likelihood was that they were going to get support. Now, the problem for mountain rescue teams, and particularly those in areas where there's not a big population, is finance. I mean, it costs, for example, to run the Aberdeen costs something in the region of between £45,000 and £50,000 a year. Now, back then, obviously, it wasn't as much as that, but you know, supplying equipment and clothing, basic clothing to the folks in the team was a huge drain on resources. And vehicles, you know, providing vehicles, maintaining vehicles, and doing all of that sort of stuff. So a lot of teams, and the Aberdeen team was no exception, we spent an inordinate amount of time fundraising, you know, through Flag Days on Union Street in Aberdeen, and you know, through folk donations from people that we'd rescued, people running coffee mornings and things like that to support the team, members of the team going out and doing talks to hill walking clubs for a small donation and so on. All of that really helped to sort of keep the team going. But fundamentally, the Order and the Order's continued support of Mountain Rescue and continued support of the Aberdeen team, I think, was a huge factor in taking Mountain Rescue in Scotland from what was, I think, you know, a very ad hoc set of organisations, and giving them the equipment to actually become much more professional in what they did. You know, and the Order has continued to do that over, you know, decades, in fact, and are still doing it to a certain extent. And I think there are a lot of mountain rescue teams in Scotland who would not be in the financial position they're in now and have the equipment and the vehicles and the accommodation they've got if it was not for the contributions made by the Order.
When did you first become a member?
I joined Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team in June 1970. I was 2 months short of my 17th birthday at that point. And like many things in life, it happened really because of a very casual conversation that could have gone absolutely nowhere. So when I came back to Aberdeen, I briefly worked for an insurance company in Aberdeen. And one of the people who worked there was a guy called Jim Murdoch. And one day over coffee, Jim said to me, "Are you interested in the hills?" And I had been doing quite a lot of walking, you know, when I was at school and came back to Aberdeen, but nothing particularly adventurous or formal. And I said, "Yeah, I'm sort of interested in the hills." He said, "You ever thought of joining a mountain rescue team?" And I had never thought of joining a mountain rescue team. Jim was a member of the Aberdeen team, and he said to me, "Well, why don't you come along on Thursday night and, you know, see what it's all about. It might be something you were interested in." So I went along the following Thursday night, and much to my surprise, so the team at this point was based in this garage at the bottom of St John's Garden. When I arrived there was a half a dozen guys bundling newspapers. So Thursday night seemed to consist of bundling newspapers. And why were they bundling newspapers? Well, at that time, I think Aberdeen had 5 paper mills. And the team used to collect newspapers, bundle them, and sell them back to the paper mills for repulping. And that was one of their major sources of income. So the garage gradually, over the week, filled up with people dumping bundles of newspaper, and the word went out to the community in Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team will take your old newspapers. And so bundling newspapers on a Thursday night was the major form of training for quite a long time. So I went along, we did that, and the team met every Thursday night and still meets every Thursday night, and then they trained every second weekend. So it just so happened that 2 weeks after I went down on the Thursday night was a training weekend. It was going to be on the west coast of Scotland. So Jim encouraged me to come along, so I had to beg, borrow all sorts of bits of equipment to go along to that. And at the end of that team weekend, I've never felt so exhausted. I've never had blisters on my feet like I had then. And I remember on the journey coming back thinking, this is not for me. This is way too hard for me, and I'm just completely out of my comfort zone here. The following week, I was hobbling about for about 4 or 5 days. Jim said to me, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure it's for me." And he said, "No, you got to stick in. It's it'll get easier as you get more acclimatized to it. Don't give it up yet." So I carried on, and as the weeks went past, and as the training events went past, and the weekends went past, I got fitter. My feet got harder, and it became less traumatic. And then you get to that point when it's not physically as demanding as it was, it becomes much more enjoyable. And it just went from there. I suddenly realised that this was something I really wanted to do. I loved being in the hills, and call-outs were always so exciting, and I loved being in the hills at night, which seems a bit strange, but there's something very spectacular about being in the middle of the Cairngorms at night. And so it just grew from there, and so that was 1970. Bill, I think, left the team in 1974 or 1975. I became a deputy team leader in 1976. Only 6 years after I joined the team. And then subsequently, I was deputy team leader from 1976 through to 1993 when I became team leader. And I was team leader for 19 years through to 2012. And at that point, I was going to stand down as a team member. I stood down as team leader because I was very conscious of the fact that we needed to get some young folk into the management of the team. And it's too easy just to sort of everybody hold their positions. So I gave the team a year's warning that I was going to stand down as team leader. And I think everybody just thought Mario will stand down, we'll get a new team leader, and Mario will probably leave the team. So when I stood down, I thought, you know what, I'm not really ready to leave the team. And so I carried on. And I thought I would carry on for a year or two. But 9 years later, is it, or something like that, I'm still there and still enjoying it. So that's my connection with Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team.
Excellent. Can I just kind of backtrack a wee bit?
Sure.
Could you explain to me what the training consisted of?
Right, back in the early days, the training was, and the phrase was that we used to really go out and beast ourselves on the hill. So this was really about, getting a high level of fitness. And the interesting thing about the Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team, and I have a suspicion it's similar with a lot of teams, is quite competitive actually in some respects. And in terms of your general level of fitness, I would say it's always been very competitive. So there was a lot of that, sort of big rucksacks on the hills, who was first to the top, all of that sort of stuff. But the demands on mountain rescue teams have changed dramatically from those days. As we've gone through, mountain rescue teams are now very professional organisations. And the things that people in a mountain rescue team need to be able to do, I think, has become much more complicated and really much more central to the role of mountain rescuers. Now, just to give you an example of that, if we come across a casualty in the centre of the Cairngorms, we may have to look after that casualty for quite a number of hours before we are able to get them back to somewhere where we can hand them over to medical professionals. So we've got people in the team who are qualified to use various analgesics like morphine and so on and so forth. So there's a very high skill level and a very high responsibility level goes into that as well. There's also the technical aspects of mountain rescue. I mean, we had a call out recently where the team was involved in rescuing 3 people who got stuck on a cliff on Loch Nagar. Now, these are cliffs that are 600 feet high. So rescuing people from there is a very technical and potentially very dangerous operation. So, making sure that people are comfortable and competent doing that sort of task is really central to what mountain rescuers do. Right at the core of it, however, remains that idea of being fit and really able to move about the hills at some considerable pace, much more so than you would be as a casual hill walker. Usually with a big rucksack, often carrying a stretcher and a whole pile of rescue kit along with your own kit. So that's a central part of it. But the other bits and pieces, I think, are also now as important, if not more important, in terms of being able to deliver mountain rescue in terms of a quality and professional service. So most teams will train very regularly at weekends, usually one evening a week or one evening a fortnight. The Aberdeen team has always trained every Thursday night, summer and winter. So in the winter, that will consist of, for example, tonight we're doing a session in here on hypothermia as we move into winter. So we'll do that. We'll do sessions on, avalanches, first aid sessions, technical rope sessions. You'll see that we've got in the other part of this building ample space to do rigging, so we can rig stretchers, we can hang stretchers up, show people how to handle a stretcher when it's in a vertical position, horizontal position, and so on. We also use helicopters a lot. So, a recent call out just a couple of weeks ago, we were all involved in being carted about the Cairngorms and helicopters, and working with helicopters requires a high level of attention and focus. So training people to do that and making sure that they can do it safely and they're not a danger to themselves or anyone else in the team, or indeed the helicopter and its crew, is an important part of the training. So it's become very technical and really quite focused on a whole number of different skills, all of which are merged together in terms of mountain rescue. So there's a set of mountaineering skills in there, navigation, moving in difficult conditions, being out at night, for example, which is not something a lot of people are very comfortable with, as you might imagine. Winter, movement using an ice axe, crampons, and so on. So you've got all of those mountaineering and sort of hill walking things that you need to be competent at. And then there's a whole mountain rescue bit that has to be grafted onto that so that you can operate as a mountain rescuer with a full and complete knowledge of all of these bits and pieces. So, I think a lot of people are actually quite intimidated when they join a mountain rescue team and they see the breadth of what they are expected to eventually develop in terms of skills and competences. And that definitely puts some people off because it's a huge commitment of time. And people these days have got busy lives, and as a result of that, I think a lot of people who might make very good mountain rescue team members and would be very happy to get involved in the team, have to balance that against all of the other aspects of their life, whether it's job, whether it's family or whatever, and so that actually I think reduces quite significantly the number of people who at the end of the day are actually prepared to say, yeah, this is something I can do and something I will do.
Who delivers the medical training?
We've always been fortunate in that we've had either paramedics or actual GPs mostly in the team. As I say, my wife was a team doctor for 10 years. We've currently got a GP who's our team doctor, but who's also the medical officer for Scottish Mountain Rescue. And we have a second doctor who's part of the team, who's an anaesthetist. So they deliver a lot of the training. So they deliver a lot of high-level training, like the session tonight is being led by these two folk. But we have got a number of folk in the team who are designated casualty carers. So that's a very high level of first aid competency. And as I said before, they're in a position where they can administer prescription-only drugs under certain circumstances. And what they do is they basically pass down a lot of their skills to the guys in the team. So most team members will pretty much all have a first aid qualification. Then that has to be sort of kept going on obviously on a regular basis. But then we've got another tier of folk above that who are these casualty carers, who have got a level of competence above what would be considered a standard first aid. And then we have 2 doctors in the team. As you might imagine, the problem with having doctors in the team is that they are probably the least available individuals in terms of call-outs, because their day job is pretty important. To take them away from their day job is obviously quite difficult. So that's why the casualty care thing has become very important in mountain rescue, because what it does is it gives teams a level of capability in terms of particularly things like pain relief and so on, that they would not have had under normal circumstances. And one of the interesting elements of that is that mountain rescue teams are increasingly engaged in being called out for people who are suffering medical emergencies. I don't know if that's a function of an ageing population or a population that has suddenly decided to go to the hills or whatever, but it is definitely a factor. So yes, we still get called out for the broken legs, the broken ankles, people stuck on cliffs, all of these things, but we get called out quite a number of times for folk who've suffered heart attacks, asthma attacks, in various medical emergencies that might occur and might actually be exacerbated by being in the hills and your body under physical stress and so on and so forth. So it is quite complicated, and first aid does take up quite a lot of the training time of, I think, most mountain rescue teams now. And so we really have an expectation that the folk who are coming along have the skills, the basic mountaineering skills, but also that what they're able to do is that they are able to, as they are part of a team, to continue to develop their mountaineering skills while at the same time grafting on these very specific skills of mountain rescue. So you can gather from that, you cannot be a member of a mountain rescue team on a casual basis. It's a pretty huge commitment, and to be an effective member of a mountain rescue team, you have to put a lot of time and effort into it, and you really need the folk back at home to be very supportive of that, or it can be very difficult indeed. I think it's impossible if the folk that you are leaving at 2 o'clock in the morning to go and wander the Cairngorm for somebody who's lost are not understanding of why you're wanting to do that and the fact that you're going to do that.
Would you talk me through a rescue from the minute you get notification that someone is lost or injured on the hills?
Okay, so the first thing that happens is we get alerted by the police. So in Scotland, the police basically have a responsibility for mountain rescue. And what they do is that that responsibility is basically passed out to the mountain rescue teams spread across Scotland. And the net result of that is that it's a classic sort of call-out scenario is, because they always happen usually at night in bad weather and generally in winter. You'll get a phone call, the team leader will get a phone call from the police officer who will give them a basic story of what's happened, what needs to happen, whether the team needs to deploy fully or partially, and where they need to deploy to. The team leader then, or a designated member of the team, will then send out I'll call it a text message, but it's not really a text message, it's a bit more complicated than that, which goes to all team members and gives them a very quick appraisal of what's needed and what they need to do. Do they need to come here? Do they need to go directly to somewhere? And what essentially is the nature of the call out? Is it a call out for someone who's lost? Is it a call out for someone who's just injured, or someone who's stuck in a cliff or whatever? In terms of this team, we would normally come here. And the big reason for that is that we've got 5 vehicles based here, we've got all of our rescue equipment based here, but the other reason is that we are 60 miles from the Cairngorms here. So most of our call-outs take place in the Cairngorms, so we gather here usually pretty quickly. Vehicles are all geared and fueled, ready to go. The vehicles are left here fueled and ready to go. The guys arrive here, we get in the vehicles and we go usually to Ballater or Braemar, because the police have coordination centres in both these villages. Then we'll get an update. This is the situation, it's still as was, or there has been a development from there. There's then a discussion usually between the team leader or the team management and the police about how we're going to be deployed and where we're going to be deployed. Are we going to be flown in by helicopter? Are we going to have to drive a Land Rover tractor somewhere and then deploy on foot? And that will be determined almost entirely by the nature of the call-out. If we know that it's an injured casualty and they are at a known location, that's very simple. We can get there, either they can get a helicopter there, or we can get a vehicle there, or most commonly we can get people walking in there very quickly. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, the Cairngorms are mountains which, quite high, but they are quite rolling and do have large plateau areas on which it's very easy to get lost, even on a fine day, far less, in the middle of winter and in bad weather. And a lot of our call-outs are for people who have gone missing. The best scenario is that they have at least told somebody which hill they were going to and which route they were taking, in which case we will deploy and we will basically follow that route in the hope that we come across that person. Worst case scenario is that somebody has said, I'm going for a walk in the Cairngorms, which is 400 square miles of mountains, and between ourselves and the other local team in Braemar that we work very closely with, we might be able to put 50 or 60 people on the ground on a good day. Covering 400 square metres with that sort of numbers is very difficult. So it depends a lot on the type of the call-out. If it's a known location and a known injury, that can be very quick. And of course, we now have access to helicopters. So if the flying conditions are correct and a helicopter's available and it's not out on another job, we might be lucky enough to get a helicopter to go straight to the casualty and just uplift the casualty without having to interact directly with a rescue team. If the casualty is in a difficult location and the helicopter can't get close, or the weather is such that the helicopter can only get a certain way in there, the helicopter will often transport us to that location, and then we will go on foot from there and then take the casualty back to the helicopter. Helicopter will take the casualty to hospital, and we'll walk back to our vehicles or whatever. So these are the sort of spread of different types of call-outs. And of course the thing is that often in a call-out, as the call-out rumbles on, the scenario changes, more information comes in. Somebody was seen in the location X, so you need to check out and see if that was the casualty or the missing person. So it can be quite a fast-moving scenario, and it's all pulled together by the quality of the communications. So we have radios, we now have obviously mobile phones, we have a satellite phone, so best case scenario we can be contacted just about anywhere. But there are places in the Cairngorms, as there are in various parts of the Scottish mountains, where communications are very poor. So people need to have a clear idea of where they're going, what the expectation is that they're going to do when they get there as a mountain rescue team, and what to do if they get there and that's not where the casualty or the missing person is. How do we reverse the steps to go back and then say, right, that's not been successful, where do we go next? And we rely very heavily on the police to coordinate that and provide the information that we need in terms of, as I say, a fairly fast and fluid situation where things will change as the call-out develops. An example of that is that the information that we sometimes get initially about who's missing and what they're carrying and how experienced they are differs quite radically from the real situation that you discover, sometime into a call-out, that they don't have all the kit that you think they should have. And so, they are maybe more vulnerable. Have they got any, pre-existing medical conditions which we would need to factor in terms of exactly how we deal with this casualty and so on. So there's a heck of a lot of information has to be gathered and passed out to make sure that a call-out can be effective. And unlike some parts of the country where call-outs tend to be relatively short in length, call-outs in the Cairngorms, which is essentially the patch that we work on, tend to be much longer. They run to hours, many hours often. And we have had situations in the Cairngorms where people have been missing in the Cairngorms for weeks before their bodies are found. So it's a huge area and has all sorts of difficulties in terms of terrain and weather. It is the highest plateau area in the country. It's the windiest part of the UK. and when the wind's blowing out of the north, it's coming straight from the Arctic. So if you're on the top of the Cairngorm Ben Macdui Plateau in January on a windy night, it's going to be pretty cold. So, this comes back to the training of the guys and what equipment we supply them with to make sure that they can do that and be, I'll say comfortable, but reasonably comfortable under those sort of conditions. And of course, that they're fit and healthy and able to handle that sort of thing. So it comes back to what I was saying before, how effective a rescue team is in a call out. Yes, it's about communication. Yes, it's about getting the information. It's about having the right equipment. It's about having the right people who are capable across a whole variety of skills of bringing this all together and deploying it in a way that's going to end up with a successful outcome.
Is there a particular type of call out where when you hear this, your heart just sinks?
Yeah, my first major call out with the Aberdeen team was a call out for what's been called the Cairngorm disaster. So the Cairngorm disaster happened, I think it was 1972, when a group of school children from Edinburgh and a couple of the leaders went out into the Cairngorms in winter with the view of crossing the Cairngorm Plateau to a small refuge hut at a location known as the Febui. They were unfortunate enough to get caught in really bad weather, blizzard weather, and they ended up digging into a snowbank because they couldn't get to the bothy. So this was at high level, almost 4,000 feet above sea level, in the middle of a blizzard. And the outcome of that was that I think it was 5 of the youngsters died of hypothermia and 1 of the instructors died of hypothermia. It had a massive impact on mountain education with youngsters, and a whole host of rules and regulations, quite rightly, were brought in to the system to ensure that people taking kids to the hills were properly qualified, understood the risks, had been trained, knew exactly what to do. And it also, I think, was a bit of a call out to mountain rescue teams, because I think it's never easy to deal with a situation where you eventually come to the conclusion that what we're probably looking for here is a body. But when it's children, obviously, and I at the time was 18, and I remember the call out very well. We got dropped off from a snow track halfway up Glenderry and into almost waist deep snow. Movement was almost impossible. The weather was terrible. And you began to realise. I mean, I remember coming home at the end of that call out, and I really did wonder whether this was something I wanted to continue on with. And I remember speaking to my parents about it at the time, and I think they were sort of hoping it was going to mark the end of my mountain rescue career. But gradually, the great thing about mountain rescue teams, and I'm sure it's exactly the same in lots of organisations. But the great thing about mountain rescue teams, and I think the thing that's kept me in mountain rescue for 51 years, is the huge level of camaraderie and support you get from the other folk in the team. I mean, I don't think it's over-dramatising it to say that mountain rescue is something in which, under certain circumstances, your life is very much in the hands of your colleagues. And you've got to trust them. You've got to have that level of understanding with them and that level of confidence that they know what they're doing, and that builds a special sort of bond. I don't want to overstate it, but the reality is that I think most mountain rescue teams feel that it is a bond, that there's a level of camaraderie and support within the team that you're not likely to find doing anything else. In civilian life certainly. And the net result of that is, I think that takes you through these call-outs, and you support each other. Now, in the modern era, we're all much more aware of the mental health fallout that can come from being exposed to these sorts of things. And I think we are, as an organisation, both within individual teams and certainly within Scottish Mountain Rescue, much more aware of the need to provide support and make sure that support is getting out to people and that they know where to find it and they know how to access it. And a lot of work's been done at a local and national level to make sure that that's the case. But certainly from my perspective, that being the first major call-out that I was involved on, I wouldn't say that I found it traumatic. I found it a difficult call-out from a physical point of view. But when I reflected back on it, I thought these folk were, I think they were 15, something like that. They were only a few years younger than me. And, I thought, goodness me, it just really quite incredible that magnitude of thing should happen, that so many people should lose their lives. And in the Cairngorms, it's just, if it happens in the Alps, you sort of can accept that, but somewhere like the Cairngorms. Now, fortunately, if anything good was able to come out of that, it was, as I say, the fact that it then developed into, a lot of discussion and a lot of talk about what needed to be done in order to improve mountain safety for parties on the hill. I mean, I went on to go into education and taught for 30 plus years. And took kids to the hills and all sorts of things. And I was always acutely aware of that level of responsibility that you had as a member of staff taking kids into a mountain environment. Because even in summer in the Cairngorms or any other set of mountains, there's a potential hazard there. You need to be aware of it and you need to be able to deal with it when it happens. And I've got a lot of respect for youth leaders, teachers who, put the time, effort and energy into taking kids on outdoor activities, be it in the mountains or sailing or canoeing or whatever it is, because it does come with a high level of responsibility and potentially a high level of personal risk if something goes wrong.
Can I just ask a couple of quick questions?
Sure.
Excuse me. Do you use dogs on any of the call-outs?
We do use dogs. We have 2 rescue dogs in the Aberdeen team, and they are hugely effective at finding people under circumstances such as avalanches. Now, a lot of people, when you talk to people about avalanches in Scotland, they give you a slightly odd look because most people associate avalanches with very big mountains, whether it's the Alps or the Himalayas or whatever like that. But Scotland averages well over 100 avalanches a year in winter, obviously. And quite a significant number of people over the years have been caught in avalanches. Many have survived, but many have not survived. The problem with snow in Scotland, as most people will be aware, is it's not the soft, fluffy stuff that you get in the Alps. It tends to be concrete-like. It's wet and it's heavy. So if you're unfortunate enough to be avalanched, the chances are you're going to suffer traumatic injury, broken bones, but you're also going to get buried in something that you're not going to be able to dig your own way out of. That's when dogs come into their own. I'm always just fascinated by the speed at which a trained rescue dog can find somebody under the snow. If that's down to individuals probing the snow to try and find somebody, you're talking about a very long time in all probability if it's a big avalanche. A dog will do that literally in a matter of a few minutes, and we've had ample opportunities to see that happen. We've got a particularly good piece of video actually of one of our dogs in an exercise going almost straight to a fully buried casualty in an area that there was no evidence of somebody being there, but the dog went straight there, does the barking thing to its owner goes, digs, and there's the casualty. So rescue dogs are very important for that. Avalanches are a particular scenario where they really come into their own, but just general search and rescue, they're very useful because of course the air scent, they're very good at that. Even out in an open mountainside, they will be able to do that in a way that no other animal can do, and certainly much more effectively than mountain rescue will do searching in a line or whatever. So yeah, I think pretty much all rescue teams now have either dogs directly embedded within the team, or they have access to dogs through the Scottish dog search and rescue team. So
you've mentioned working with the police and air ambulance.
Yeah.
Is that Scottish Air Ambulance?
We work with them, but we also work mostly with the Coast Guard. So that's the Marine and Coastal Agency helicopters based in Inverness here. There's a charity air ambulance based in Aberdeen. So these are the two helicopters that we would most likely get involved in. The charity air ambulance in Aberdeen, we've been involved with for call-outs on Benihee, some of the lower local hills. The hills in the central Cairngorms tend to be the Coast Guard helicopter from Inverness.
What are your relations with the people who work in these organisations?
They're generally not directly with the controllers. The relationship is usually with the aircrew itself. When we run practice exercises with helicopters, the helicopter will come in, it will land on, we have two bases in the Cairngorms, one at Derry and one at Spittal of Mick. The helicopter will come in, they'll land, they'll shut down. They'll usually do some sort of ground training with the guys. A walk around the helicopter, in the helicopter, we talk the guys through winching procedures, which we do all the time. But as I say, it's important to keep reinforcing exactly how this is done. And then they will do an operation where they will maybe lift us somewhere and winch everybody down, winch everybody back up so that everybody gets it. So in doing that, you get to know the air crew. You get to know the winchmen in particular, obviously, and they get to know you. And so that's really where the connection is. So it's really at the point of delivery, if you know what I mean, rather than at the organisational point. So once the helicopter is activated, the police will request a helicopter or whatever. That's all done by the police. We don't do it directly, it's done through the police. And our interaction is very much at a practical level with the air crew when they arrive on scene. Because often when they arrive on scene, they will be asking us, where do you want us to take you? If we can't get to the ideal location, what's the next best location we can take you to, and so on. Who do you want to take up there? Do you want to take all the team? Do you want to take a small group of people to go in quickly and see what they can find or whatever? So that's where the one-on-one interaction really lies.
How dangerous is it for you as a volunteer and members of your teams to be out on the hills doing a shout? Yeah,
it is potentially hazardous, and members of mountain rescue teams have been badly injured in call-outs and in training. What I say to people is, if you excuse my going back into the history of mountaineering, mountaineering is a risk activity. There's no doubt about that. If you go to the hills often enough, your chances of being on the sharp end of an accident are very high. No matter how competent or professional you are, a stumble over a boulder where you fall and break your leg can happen to anybody at any time. So there's that risk. From a mountain rescue perspective, that risk is heightened by the fact that we are often operating under really difficult conditions. Poor visibility, as I say, often at night, and often in very difficult terrain. So the net result of that is that the potential for a mountain rescue team member to be injured is actually quite high. I think it's down to the quality of the individuals in the training and the effort that they put in to make sure that they are competent at moving about the hill under difficult conditions. That actually, bearing in mind the number of call-outs and the number of mountain rescue team members there are across the country, there are remarkably few serious injuries. But mountain rescue team members have been killed on call-outs, which is hugely tragic and very traumatic, not just for the rescue team, for families and for other rescue teams, who see that, hear about it, and then begin to understand exactly what the risks are. We are, I think, very good at making sure that people don't step into danger accidentally. So when we're doing a technical rescue, for example, at the top of a cliff, we will appoint somebody to be a safety officer. So their only job is really not to get involved in the nitty-gritty of the rescue. Their only job is to make sure that nobody, so they've got eyes on everybody, that nobody is doing something that is going to become a hazard to themselves or somebody else. And if you're doing something, as I was saying, like lowering people down a cliff, you want to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and that they're doing it appropriately and correctly. So, that's something. It's all about the mitigation of risk. It's all about trying to reduce the risk factor to a point where it's acceptable. Moving into terrain on steep ground where somebody has been avalanched, there's a potential for a second avalanche. that's a risk, a massive risk. And so, that comes down to the quality of the decision making on part of the team members, but also whoever's managing the team at that point. Do we send people in there? How many people do we send in there? How do we try to reduce that risk by making sure that people are going in there are adequately trained, that they've got avalanche transceivers on them, so that if they were unfortunate enough to be avalanched and buried, we could find them very quickly and so on. So, it's a lot of thinking goes into a situation before we actually go and do something to make sure that nobody's actually putting themselves at an unacceptable level of risk. But having said that, it is important to point out to people that this is a risky activity, and there is a higher than average potential as a hill walker for you to be injured as part of a mountain rescue team. I mean, just doing something like carrying a stretcher through a boulder field, and there are a lot of boulder fields in the Cairngorms and in the Scottish Hills. So at some point in your career as a mountain rescue team member, you're going to be manhandling, a stretcher with a casualty in it over difficult ground, and the chances of you putting your leg between two boulders and doing yourself a nasty is quite high. So, it's that idea that, we're looking after the casualty, we're doing our very best for the casualty, but we're mindful of the fact that, a successful rescue is getting the lost person, the casualty, home safe and well, but also getting all the members of the rescue team home safe and well.
As an organisation, what would you say have been the main challenges for Scottish Mountain Rescue over, your involvement?
I think people, when I give talks to people, and they say, how long have you been involved in the rescue team? And I say, well, whatever it was, 40 years, 50 years, and now 51 years. What I say to them, and I usually have a wee slide that I put up on a PowerPoint, which is a photograph that was taken of me at the age of 18 in a quarry somewhere in the Cairngorms. I had hair then. And as I say to them, this was 1973 or 74. I said, Elvis Presley was still alive. Nobody had invented smartphones. There was no such thing as Gore-Tex, and so on. And that actually fundamentally, is what's changed. The quality of the kit that we now have at our disposal is just light years from what it was. I remember when I was first given a set of waterproofs as a badged member of the team, that meant that I was now on the call-out list. I mean, these were waterproofs that were essentially just sort of rubberised backing onto jackets. And unless it was absolutely pouring down with rain, it wasn't really worth putting on, because the condensation, if you were thrashing up a hill somewhere, was, you would be soaked to the skin anyway. So, but now, we supply equipment to the guys. We didn't used to do that in the early days. People used to supply all their own kit. Now we supply the guys with pretty much all of their kit. So the gear is much better. The rescue gear is much better as well. The quality of it, it's much lighter than it was. It's much more durable than it was. But with that goes the fact that it's very much more expensive than it was. But the other major factor, I think, is the quality of communications. It is very important that when you're out on the hill in a remote corner of the Scottish Hills somewhere, that you are able, as a mountain rescuer, to communicate with other parts of the rescue team who may be in other locations, but also with the control room to know what's going on, what they need you to do next, and so on. And back in the day, we had the radios we had when I joined the team were, I think, ex-army radios. They were big, heavy, clunky things, and basically, the joke was that you would be better off with 2 syrup tins and a length of string. And that wasn't far from the truth, actually. I mean, our modern radios, are very effective, and the fact that, you can get smartphone access pretty much anywhere in the hills, and we often get call-outs for people who've got lost and got on their smartphone and said, I'm on the top of a hill, but I'm not sure which hill, and I'm not sure where I am, and the mist's come down and I'm totally lost. And that ability to communicate with somebody who's lost on the hill or injured on the hill is a real game changer in terms of how quickly a mountain rescue team can respond, get to that person, do whatever needs to be done, and get them off the hill. So it's the gear, it's the communications, but also I think central to all of that is the quality of the professionalism that team members now bring to the game. Because, you've got to imagine these people are fitting this in alongside full-time jobs and all the rest of it. And they're doing it under difficult conditions, but they bring to call-outs a high level of physical fitness, a high level of training, and an ability to work as an important cog in a team to bring about a successful conclusion. And I think that these three components really, for me, are the key things that have changed since I joined the team. It's gone from being, I'll describe it as an ad hoc sort of organisation, which didn't fumble its way about the hills, but certainly I think often wasn't quite sure where it was going or what it was doing, to an organisation which is highly professional, knows what it's doing, is very capable to deal with pretty much any situation they come across, whether it be an injury, somebody who's lost, somebody who's stuck somewhere or whatever. We have the means in terms of the equipment, but also in terms of the personnel to affect a positive outcome. And that's what Mountain Rescue should be about.
How is Scottish Mountain Rescue funded?
Right, so all the rescue teams are voluntary. And up until just not too many years ago, they were all responsible for raising their own funds. So each mountain rescue team was a fundraising body, basically. They're all charities, they're all designated charities. But a number of years ago, I think the Scottish Government realised that activity in the hills brought a lot of money into Scotland. A lot of people come to Scotland to go hill walking, skiing, whatever. And I think they saw the value, they did see the value of having a voluntary organisation spread across all the mountainous areas of Scotland who were prepared to come at the drop of a hat at no cost directly to the government to rescue people, and who raised their funds to buy their stretchers or whatever and these bits and pieces. And at that point they decided that what they would do is they would make an annual contribution to to the rescue teams. It's given to Scottish Mountain Rescue, the sort of parent body of mountain rescue in Scotland, and then through a formula that is being calculated to disperse the money across the teams based on number of team members, number of call-outs per year, number of vehicles, a whole variety of things which would impact on your finances as a team. A proportionate part of what's given by the government, Scottish Government, is dispersed out to teams. But it doesn't cover by any manner of means the cost of running a mountain rescue team. That still is very much down to individual teams running. We run an annual sponsor walk, have done for 50 years now. But we also get donations from, as I said before, hill walking clubs and organisations that we go out and give talks to. We get donations from people who we've rescued, and we also get donations that come in from people that have no direct connection with mountain rescue, but have maybe seen something in the paper about a rescue that took place, or have a relation or a colleague who was rescued and decides to make a donation. And it's a combination of all of these things that teams try to put together in order to keep their finances in a healthy situation. It's more of a challenge, as I said before, for those teams that are located in less populated areas, because they don't have the sort of breadth of population to actually go and shake hands under or whatever. So some teams are undoubtedly better off than others. But and this sort of brings us back to the Order of St John in some respects, because I think in many ways what the Order has done over the last, 50 years, has allowed a lot of these teams to get access to, whether it's accommodation or whether it's vehicles, of a quality that they would never have been able to do had they been relying on fundraising locally. If you look at this building, this is a superb building. We have a room where we can dry gear when we come back off a call out. We have somewhere to garage our vehicles. We have a room that we can come in and do our meetings in and practice first aid or whatever. It's worlds apart from what we probably would have been able to provide if that had been all had to be paid for by what Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team could gather together in terms of finance.
When did you become a member of St John Scotland?
I became a member of St John Scotland. I think I became a serving brother, as it's called, in 1979. And then I became an O St J in... That's a good question. It would have been 92, something like that. Yeah.
Can you tell me what are your duties in relation to the order?
I don't have any direct duties in relation to the order. I mean, I would say that what I do for the order, if that's the correct terminology, is that I am very quick to give anyone who wonders what the order provides in terms of mountain rescue, because that's my area of understanding and expertise. A background of exactly what the order has put into Scottish Mountain Rescue over, as I say, 50 years. So I'll use the word, but I suppose what I would see myself as, and always have done, is a sort of ambassador for the order. In that, I have lived through 50 years of the order's involvement in Scottish Mountain Rescue, and so I've got a perspective that not all that many people in Scottish Mountain Rescue would have, of the direct impact of the generosity of the Order of St John in terms of supporting and helping to develop Scottish Mountain Rescue to the point that it's at just now. Because, it's not overstating it to say that, I think if it was not for the input from Scottish Mountain Rescue, from the Order of St John to Scottish Mountain Rescue, that most of the teams in Scotland would not be in the situation they're in now in terms of their access to, whether it's buildings or vehicles or whatever. And that takes a big burden off the backs of the team members in terms of raising funds, but also helps to promote a level of professionalism for the rescue teams in terms of what they're able to do. So, it has been a massive contribution. It has been a massive support for Scottish Mountain Rescue, and I like to think that one of the things I do is make sure that people don't forget that. We've got a team that is relatively young in terms of the ages of our team members. I mean, a lot of the Scottish teams, a lot of the teams, I think, nationally in terms of England and Wales as well, have got a fairly ageing population in terms of team members. And lots of teams complain that they have difficulty in getting volunteers. And, that takes us back to what we spoke about before, in that busy lives, people don't have the time to commit to mountain rescue perhaps in the way that they once did. But I think that the downside of having young folk in the team, if there is a downside, the only downside I would say is that they don't know the history of what's going on. They take it for granted. When I ramble on as a 51-year, 68-year-old member of Aberdeen Mountain Rescue Team, and I say, back in the day we had to do this and we had to do that, and I tell them about bundling newspapers to raise money. That's a whole different life that they've never lived, understandably. But what they have to realise is we have this building and 5 Land Rovers through there, not exclusively, but pretty much so on the back of an organisation called the Order of St John, which most of them have had no direct contact with. And I point them to the plaque on the wall there in the newspaper cutting, which was about the opening of this building. And I say to them, if you want to know anything about this building, go and read that. We've got some new guys who've just joined the team recently. So they will walk in the door here and they will just see all of this. They will have no direct concept of who paid for it or how it comes to be here. And why would they, and so I do feel it's important that we do make the point that the Order have made a contribution. And also, I think at a national level, I think Scottish Mountain Rescue have a role to play in making sure that message gets out there. I mean, going forward, clearly, we're living in uncharted water and difficult times, I suppose, and no one knows what's coming next. But I think whatever comes next, I do think it's absolutely important that as members of Scottish Mountain Rescue teams and as Scottish Mountain Rescue generally, that we don't forget where we've come from and why we've been able to get to where we are now.
Do you think that having your Order of St John cap on, that the Order does enough to promote itself?
I would have to say no. I'm actually always surprised at how, I have always been surprised, I suppose, at how little the Order demands in terms of feedback, payback for the contribution that it's made. I mean, apart from vehicles carrying badges, and we've got on our sign on the door, Order of St John and so on. I don't think it gets enough back, and I think that's maybe. I'm not really sure why that is. I don't think it's certainly not because of a lack of appreciation. It's maybe just a lack of thought, actually, that that we should be doing more to make sure that the Order of St John looms large, and not just in our thinking, but in what we say to people and what we put out there in terms of promoting ourselves. I certainly am very aware that, and I do a lot of talks to groups, whether they're hill walking clubs or probus groups or whatever. I always make the point that the Order of St John has been certainly in terms of the Aberdeen team, has been a hugely important factor in terms of the creation and development of the team, and over many years. This is not an organisation that has come in and done a one-off contribution and then bathed in the goodwill that's come from that. It's an organisation. The Order's an organisation that has consistently come up with the goods for rescue teams, and asked very little, I think, in return for that. And maybe that's been a mistake, I don't know.
I think that's actually all my questions. Is there anything you would like to add? Have I missed something?
I don't think so. I think that's been a ramble through most of my thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Mario. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.